Let's start with something nobody tells you when you're broke, ignored, underestimated, or struggling. They tell you success will change your life. They don't tell you it will change your relationships. They don't tell you it will change how people look at you. They don't tell you it will slowly, quietly isolate you. Because success doesn't just elevate you, it separates you. At the beginning, you're surrounded by people. Friends, co-workers, family. Conversations are easy. Laughter is natural. You belong. Then something shifts. You start working harder than everyone else. You start sacrificing more. You say no more often. You disappear to build something. And that's when the gap begins. Success requires obsession. Obsession requires isolation. Isolation rewires your identity. The more disciplined you become, the less relatable you are. You stop complaining. You stop wasting time. You stop participating in drama. You stop explaining your goals to people who think small. And slowly, you notice something strange. The room feels different when you walk in. People who used to joke with you now measure themselves against you. People who used to support you now watch you. People who used to understand you now question you. Success exposes insecurity in others. When you level up, you unintentionally highlight who stayed the same. And that makes people uncomfortable. Not because they hate you, but because your growth confronts their stagnation. And most people would rather distance themselves from discomfort than confront it. So the conversations get shorter, the invitations decrease, the energy shifts, and you're left wondering, why does winning feel quiet? Here's the dark psychology behind it. Human connection is built on similarity. We bond over shared struggles, shared complaints, shared limitations. When you remove yourself from the struggle, you remove the common ground. You no longer relate to late-night excuses. You no longer connect with average thinking. You no longer laugh at things that once distracted you. Growth creates psychological distance, and distance feels like rejection to those who stayed behind. But it's deeper than that. Success changes your internal world. You become more aware, more observant, more strategic. You start noticing manipulation faster. You see hidden motives. You recognize who claps for you and who competes silently. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So you withdraw, not out of arrogance, out of clarity. Clarity is lonely, because the more self-aware you become, the fewer people you can genuinely connect with. Most conversations start feeling surface level. Most interactions feel transactional. Most compliments feel loaded. And you start missing something you can't explain. You miss being unknown. Because when you were unknown, nobody had expectations of you. Nobody watched your moves. Nobody analyzed your decisions. Nobody felt threatened by your ambition. You were safe. Success removes safety. Now people expect things. They project things. They assume things. They assume you're arrogant if you're quiet. They assume you're selfish if you prioritize work. They assume you've changed. But you didn't change. You evolved. And evolution is uncomfortable for people who aren't evolving. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Success reveals who loved you for you, and who loved you for access. When you had nothing, loyalty was easy. When you gain influence, money, or status, loyalty becomes complicated. People start calculating. What can they get? How can they benefit? How close should they stay? You start feeling used in subtle ways. And once trust cracks, you pull back. Not because you hate people, but because you've seen how fragile relationships become when value increases. Power changes dynamics. Even small success shifts the energy in friendships. The friend who used to give advice now feels inferior. The one who laughed at your dreams now avoids the topic. The supportive ones sometimes grow distant without explanation. And the worst part? You can't complain about it. Because from the outside, you won. You have what others want. So when you feel lonely, it sounds ungrateful. But loneliness at the top isn't about lack of people. It's about lack of equal energy. It's about not being fully understood. You carry responsibilities others don't see. You make decisions others don't understand. You sacrifice in silence. And the higher you climb, the smaller the circle gets. Because not everyone can handle your altitude. Some get dizzy, some get jealous, some get resentful, some just drift away. And here's the dark psychological pattern. The more independent you become, the less emotionally dependent you allow yourself to be. You train yourself to rely on discipline instead of validation, on logic instead of comfort, on results instead of reassurance. You become strong, but strength reduces vulnerability. And vulnerability is the bridge to intimacy. So as you protect your energy, you unintentionally reduce connection. You stop sharing struggles. You stop admitting fear. You stop revealing doubt. You become composed. And composed people look untouchable. Untouchable people feel alone. Now let's go deeper. There's a hidden grief in success. You outgrow versions of yourself, but attached to those versions were people, memories, jokes, habits, places. When you upgrade your mindset, some relationships no longer align. You feel it. The conversations feel repetitive. The ambitions don't match. The values slowly misalign. So you create distance. And even if it's necessary, it hurts. Because growth requires endings. And endings create silence. Another reason success is lonely. You stop being able to fully trust praise. When you're average, compliments are simple. When you're successful, praise feels strategic. You question motives. You analyze tone. You wonder who is genuine. And that constant awareness keeps you guarded. Guarded people rarely feel deeply connected. Now think about this. When you were building, you had a mission. The mission kept you busy, focused, driven. But when you achieve something significant, there's a quiet moment. And in that quiet moment, you realize the grind distracted you from loneliness. Ambition masked emptiness. Now you're successful, and the noise is gone, and you're alone with your thoughts. Success amplifies whatever is unresolved inside you. If you haven't built emotional depth, you'll feel hollow. If you haven't built strong relationships intentionally, you'll feel isolated. If you've sacrificed connection for achievement completely, you'll notice the absence. This is why some successful people sabotage themselves. They miss the chaos. They miss the struggle. They miss being part of something bigger than their own ambition. Because belonging is a basic human need, and success sometimes replaces belonging with admiration. But admiration is not intimacy. Applause is not connection. Attention is not understanding. You can have thousands watching you and still have nobody who truly knows you. And here's the final uncomfortable layer. Success forces you to raise your standards in relationships, in friendships, in conversations. You can't unsee mediocrity once you've escaped it. You can't tolerate energy that drains you. You can't pretend to relate to mindsets you've outgrown. So your world becomes smaller, more controlled, more selective, which is powerful. But selective living means fewer people qualify. And that's okay, because the loneliness of success is temporary. if you evolve emotionally alongside your achievements. The solution isn't shrinking yourself to feel included. It's building new circles aligned with your growth. It's allowing vulnerability even when you're strong. It's finding people who value you beyond status. It's remembering that connection requires effort, not just ambition. Success doesn't have to make you lonely. But if you chase status without building depth, if you protect yourself so much that no one can reach you, if you measure value only in results, you will stand at the top, alone. And here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Some people prefer staying small because it feels socially safer, because staying average keeps relationships comfortable. Growth disrupts comfort, and disruption creates isolation before it creates alignment. So if you feel lonely as you rise, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're transitioning. You're shedding environments that no longer fit. You're evolving faster than your surroundings. The key is not to let isolation turn into emotional numbness. Stay sharp, stay ambitious, but don't lose your ability to connect. Because real power isn't just building success, it's building success without losing your humanity. And that is the rarest form of winning. But let's go deeper. Because the loneliness of success doesn't always arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly. It shows up in small moments. When you achieve something big and don't know who to call. When you sit in a better apartment, in a better city, with a better bank balance, and realize the room echoes louder than before. When your phone is full of contacts, but empty of real conversations. That's when it hits. Success filtered your circle, but it didn't automatically refill it. And here's the psychological truth most people never examine. Climbing up is an individual sport. Staying emotionally fulfilled at the top is a team effort. The mindset that helped you escape mediocrity is not always the same mindset that helps you build connection, the hyper-independence, the emotional control, the calculated decisions, the refusal to rely on anyone. Those traits win battles, but they can lose intimacy. Let's talk about hyper-independence. When you grow up feeling unsupported, underestimated, or alone, you build a silent promise inside yourself. I will never need anyone. That promise fuels success. It turns pain into discipline, rejection into ambition, silence into focus. But once you succeed, that same promise becomes a prison. Because if you trained yourself not to need anyone, how do you allow someone close? If you built your empire alone, how do you share it? Many successful people don't feel lonely because others left. They feel lonely because they never learned how to let anyone stay. Control feels safer than vulnerability. Achievement feels safer than emotional exposure. Winning feels safer than admitting fear. And so they build higher walls with better views. Now let's examine something darker. Envy. Success activates comparison in others automatically. Even people who love you can struggle with your growth. Not because they want to harm you, but because your progress triggers their insecurities. Psychologically, humans measure themselves against their social circle. When someone in that circle accelerates rapidly, it disrupts the balance. Suddenly, they feel behind, and instead of improving themselves, some unconsciously distance from the reminder. That reminder is you. So you notice subtle shifts, less enthusiasm, backhanded compliments, jokes that feel slightly sharp, energy that feels slightly cold. You start realizing something uncomfortable. Not everyone can celebrate what they don't believe they can achieve. And that realization creates emotional caution. Caution turns into distance. Distance turns into isolation. And isolation feels like loneliness. But there's another layer. When you succeed, your problems change. Before success, your problems were survival-based. Bills, opportunities, recognition, validation. After success, your problems become psychological. Trust, purpose, alignment, legacy. And here's the hard part. Most people around you can't relate to your new problems. So when you try to explain pressure, responsibility, or fear of losing what you built, they respond with, "At least you're successful," which invalidates your emotional experience. So you stop sharing. You keep it inside. You become the strong one, the composed one, the stable one. But even strong people need somewhere to collapse safely. And if they don't have it, they collapse internally. Now let's talk about identity shift. Success forces you to redefine who you are. When you were striving, your identity was built around hunger. You were the underdog, the dreamer, the builder. But once you reach a new level, that identity dissolves. And the question appears, who am I now? This transitional phase is extremely lonely because you no longer relate to your old self, but you haven't fully adapted to your new self. You're in between, and in between spaces are quiet. You may feel disconnected from your past friends, disconnected from your old habits, disconnected even from your old personality. Growth creates identity gaps, and identity gaps feel isolating. Another hidden factor is expectations. When you succeed, people expect consistency. They expect leadership. They expect confidence. They expect answers. So even when you're confused, you can't show it easily. Even when you're tired, you keep performing. Even when you're uncertain, you project certainty. That performance drains energy, and exhaustion reduces social desire. So you choose solitude, not because you hate people, but because silence feels restful. Silence feels honest. Now here's something even darker. Success can make you suspicious. You start wondering, do they like me or what I represent? Do they respect me or what I've achieved? Would they stay if everything disappeared tomorrow? Those questions quietly erode trust. And without trust, connection weakens. You might test people subconsciously, pull away to see who follows, act distant to see who notices. But constant testing damages closeness. And so, the loneliness deepens. Let's also address ambition addiction. Some people become addicted to the climb because climbing gives them purpose. And when they reach milestones, they don't celebrate. They escalate. New target, new goal, new pressure. They replace connection time with productivity time. They choose progress over presence. Over time, relationships starve. Not from betrayal, but from neglect. And neglected relationships eventually fade, not dramatically, quietly, which reinforces the belief success isolates. But here's the truth. Success doesn't isolate. Unbalanced success does. If you only build externally and never internally, you will feel empty at the top. If you only increase income and never increase emotional intelligence, you will struggle to maintain deep bonds. If you only protect your energy and never share it, your world becomes small. Now let's shift perspective. Loneliness isn't always negative. There are two types: isolation from rejection and isolation from elevation. Rejection isolation feels painful because you were excluded. Elevation isolation feels painful because you outgrew environments. But elevation isolation is temporary. It's the space between circles. You left the old one. You haven't yet built the new one. This phase tests emotional maturity. Will you shrink yourself to fit back in? Or will you tolerate temporary loneliness while you align with new people? Most people choose comfort over alignment. That's why they plateau. Because fitting in feels safer than standing alone. But here's the paradox. If you handle this phase correctly, loneliness becomes refinement. It forces you to evaluate what you truly want in relationships. It makes you selective, intentional, aware. You stop chasing quantity. You start valuing depth. You look for conversations that challenge you, people who inspire you, energy that feels equal, and equal energy is rare. But when you find it, loneliness dissolves. Now let's talk about emotional numbness. Some successful individuals cope with isolation by detaching completely. They convince themselves they don't need connection. They label vulnerability as weakness. They build identities around being untouchable. But emotional suppression has consequences. You may stop feeling hurt, but you also reduce your ability to feel joy. You become efficient, disciplined, impressive, but internally muted. And muted emotions create a strange emptiness. You achieve more, but feel less. That's not strength. That's armor overload. True power is controlled vulnerability. The ability to say, yes, I'm strong. Yes, I'm successful. And yes, I still need connection. Because needing connection is not weakness. It's biology. Humans evolved in tribes. Success does not remove that wiring. Ignoring it creates imbalance. Now imagine this. You continue climbing. You keep building. You grow wealth, influence, recognition. But you never build emotional anchors. 10 years later, you have everything you chased, except someone who truly knows you. That's the nightmare scenario. Not failure. Emotional emptiness disguised as success. And here's the final psychological twist. Sometimes loneliness is not caused by success. It's revealed by it. When you're busy surviving, you don't notice emotional gaps. When you finally achieve stability, you have space to feel. And in that space, unresolved loneliness surfaces. So don't blame success entirely. Sometimes it simply exposes what was already there. Now the real question becomes, how do you win without isolating yourself? First, separate identity from achievement. You are not your results. You are not your income. You are not your status. If you tie self-worth only to performance, relationships will always feel conditional. Second, build alongside people, not just above them. Find communities aligned with growth, mastermind groups, mentorship circles, creative networks. Shared ambition reduces isolation. Third, practice selective vulnerability. Not with everyone, but with the right ones. Strength is respected. Authenticity is trusted. Fourth, celebrate quietly, but share intentionally. Let people into your world emotionally, not just visually, because social media highlights create admiration. Real conversations create connection. And finally, understand that loneliness during growth is often a sign of transition, not failure. You are shedding, refining, elevating, but never confuse solitude for superiority, and never confuse independence for invulnerability. The strongest people are not the ones who need nobody. They are the ones who could survive alone, but choose not to, because they understand something deeper. Success is not measured by how high you stand. It's measured by who stands with you willingly. And if you can build wealth without ego, power without paranoia, strength without emotional shutdown, then you didn't just escape mediocrity. You mastered balance. And balance is rare. So if you feel lonely while rising, don't panic, don't shrink. Don't harden. Refine. Because the right connections are built at your new level, not your old one. Keep climbing. But don't forget to build bridges while you do. Because the view is better when it's shared. And here's the final truth. Success will test you in ways failure never could. Failure hurts your ego. Success tests your soul. Because when you have nothing, you blame the world. When you have everything, you face yourself. You face the silence. You face the distance. You face the question nobody prepares you for. Was it worth it? And the answer isn't in the money. It isn't in the status. It isn't in the applause. It's in who can sit across from you. When the cameras are off, when the deals are done, when the ambition goes quiet. If you built success but destroyed connection, you didn't win. You escaped one prison and built another. But if you built discipline without losing empathy, if you built power without losing softness, if you climbed without stepping on your own humanity, then you've done something rare.